Welcome to the Patriots Pulse postgame show. I'm your host, John Sarandinas. And as always, I'm joined by my partner, WEEI's John Lyons. And John, happy football season, my friend. How are things?
They've started off pretty well, John, with the Patriots winning 16-10 over the Cincinnati Bengals, going on the road. Gerard Mayo's first game as head coach. And I thought, look, it wasn't spectacular, John, but they won a game that a lot of people didn't think they could win. They played sound, fundamental football. And when it came down to it, they made more key plays than the team that was in the Super Bowl a few years ago. So I think they deserve a lot of credit for this one. Offense made the key plays when it needed to. The defense was terrific in this game. This was arguably, John, the best special teams game I think they've had in 3 years. So, again, just top to bottom, I thought it was a really impressive performance, especially when you consider rookie head coach, new defensive coordinator, new offensive coordinator, new special teams coordinator, new starting quarterback. Like, I could go on and on here, right? A lot of new faces, and they did enough to get a really good win on the road to start off Gerard Mayo's tenure.
And before we really delve into the conversation here, I do want to remind you that while you have many post-game show options, consider us. Feel free to join the conversation. You can jump on the chat feature. We are live on Facebook, X, our YouTube channel, and Twitch. So again, feel free to join the show. We're going to break it all down. We'd love to hear from you. Just jump on the chat feature and let us know what you think. And I want to start there, John. Obviously, I said this to you before we went live, but both of us have been in football for a long time, right? And as a young coach, I was told an important adage. There are two things in football that travel: running games and defenses. And both of those elements of the game were on full display today. Patriots ran the football effectively. They played great defense. So coming into the season, we said that if this team was going to have a chance to be competitive at all this season, they were going to need to do those two things. They did those two things and then some. An impressive performance by Ramondre Stevenson, 25 carries, 120 yards. He had a rushing touchdown. He was unbelievable. He looked like a workhorse running back. And what can you say about the defense? The defense was fantastic. They held Joe Burrow to 164 passing yards. They only gave up 70 yards on the ground. I mean, they basically held the Bengals to 250 total yards of offense. Look, on paper, this team has a lot of holes. We know that. But if they can play like this, and I think a lot of their games are going to mirror this one throughout the season, if they can play like this, where they run the football, play good defense, play fundamentally sound, take care of the ball, dare I say they're going to be better than we think?
Yeah, and the Bengals, to your defense point, they had 224 yards total for the game, but 90 of them came on their one touchdown drive. So really, outside of that one drive, they couldn't do anything against the Patriots defense. Jonathan Jones had that fantastic fourth down stop. They forced two fumbles. And we got to take a moment here, John. I think the key moment in the game was Kyle Duggar near the end of the first half. The Bengals had what they looked like was a passing touchdown to Mike Gesicki. He bobbled it a little bit, but Duggar was right there helping to knock it out, prevents a touchdown. Then on the next play, Bengals have what looks like could be a walk-in touchdown. Duggar comes up from behind, forces a fumble. It bounces right to Marcus Jones, but Duggar alone prevents two touchdowns in the span of two plays. Patriots go down and get a field goal. Obviously, it's a tight game all around. I mean, if the Bengals, even if they had just got a field goal on that drive, maybe we're having a different conversation coming out of halftime. We, of course, would have been if they scored a touchdown. This is a player that the Patriots drafted in the second round a couple of years ago. He's gotten better each year. They invested a lot of money in this offseason, and there's a lot of reasons the Patriots won today, but I thought his play in those key moments was probably the biggest reason why.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And look, you saw it pretty early on that the defense had come to play. They had a chip on their shoulder. They had something to prove. I thought they did a great job in terms of their run fits, their pursuit angles. They were able to get hats to the ball, multiple hats to the ball, especially in run support. And I think the biggest surprise for me, John, was the amount of pressure that they were able to consistently get on Joe Burrow. And it wasn't just because they brought pressure. Look, I think when we look at this defensive performance, you go back and you watch the tape, you're going to see a lot of different things here than what we're used to seeing. You saw a lot more pressure. I think they brought more pressure. You saw more front variance. You saw a willingness to mug the line of scrimmage and either go or drop. They did a lot of different things from a looks standpoint. But for me, the biggest takeaway of this performance defensively was just the edge that they played with. It was nice to see. Not that they didn't have that edge last year or previous years, and this is by no means a knock on the great Bill Belichick. All I'm simply saying is, you know, Ian Eagle kept talking about this throughout the game, about these guys wanting to prove a point today and prove to the rest of the world that they're better than what people think they're going to be. I think the defense in many ways was emblematic of that. They wanted to go out there. They had a chip on their shoulder. They wanted to prove that, hey, we're not just going to lay down here and play through this season as a bridge year for a top 3 pick. We want to win. We want to compete. I thought the defense sent that message today loud and clear.
Yeah, I agree completely. And I think a big part of this, John, is the continuity on defense. You look around, I know they traded Matt Judon. You look around at those guys playing today, a lot of guys who have had multiple years in New England system. And I know I mentioned they have a new defensive coordinator, but DeMarcus Covington has been here for several years. You have Brian Belichick and Mike Pellegrino still coaching the defensive backs, who, by the way, I thought the defensive backs were terrific today. I mentioned Duggar already, Marcus Jones, Jonathan Jones, Christian Gonzalez shadowed Jamar Chase for almost the entire game.
He played unbelievable, I thought,
I
especially
thought
when
he
you
was
consider the camp he had.
Yeah, I thought he was fantastic today. And even Dante Hightower, first year coaching, but he's been in New England's system for so long. He's familiar with Gerard Mayo, with a lot of these coaches. So I think that continuity played a big role. And a guy we haven't mentioned yet, Keon White. He had 1 sack all of last year, 2.5 today. He was a force. Charles Davis even called him a game wrecker later in this game. I mean, Keon White, look, last year he had 1 sack, but he had 15 quarterback hurries in kind of a rotational role. If he can turn some of those hurries into sacks like he did today, then they're not going to miss Matt Judon that much. I'm not saying they're not going to miss him at all, but that's really going to mitigate the loss of Matt Judon. So this defense really, from the front 4 all the way through to the safeties, was just excellent today against a Bengals offense that, look, I know there was no T. Higgins. That's still Jamar Chase. It's still Joe Burrow. It's still Zach Taylor. Like, there's still a lot of good players and coaches on that side of the ball. And they allowed 10 points, and the Bengals basically did nothing outside of 1 drive.
Yeah, and you bring up a great point with White. You know, going into this season, I think that universally we all would have agreed that probably Joshua Uche, that's his name now, that's how he wants to be pronounced, but Joshua Uche would have been their best pass rusher on paper, but there's no question that Keon White is a potential star in the making here. I don't think that's hyperbole. I think that's fact. And it's a shame that Barmore's not healthy, because I think if Christian Barmore's healthy, with Barmore inside, White on the outside, that's a dynamic 1-2 punch along your defensive line now that's going to give you consistent push. But like I said, I think that they're going to be more aggressive this season. I love that they were mugging the line of scrimmage, showing and going. I love that they played a little loose on the back end, but they were exotic up front. I love to play defense that way, because then that allows your secondary to route read, match up, and attack. And what it does is it allows your front 7 to be aggressive. I thought that they did a really good job defensively. Kudos to DeMarcus Covington and the defensive coaching staff. They had a terrific plan. They got after Burrow. And look, I don't care what anybody tells you. They missed Joe Mixon today. And Joe Mixon had a good game for the Houston Texans. They missed Joe Mixon today, because Joe Mixon was a different kind of cat back there. He was a pile pusher. He's a guy who ran hard. He's a guy who had that second gear and could separate in space. They didn't have that in this game. No disrespect to Zach Moss and Chase Brown, but they cut some corners there financially, traded Mixon, and they really could have used him today. But again, even if they had him, I think the way this Patriots defense played, where they were so fired up but also so fundamentally sound, I'm not sure it would have mattered much, but it was an impressive performance nonetheless. And we do have our good friend Lauren Gaudette checking in like death and taxes. Lauren Gaudette's going to join the show. I'm ecstatic that the Pats able to control this game and win it in Cincinnati. All 3 sides of the ball did their job. I anticipate the offense will get better each week once Van Pelt tweaks the playbook some more. Yeah, I don't know how much he tweaks it, John. This is their formula, as I said earlier. I think if this team's going to be competitive in 2024, this is how they're going to have to do it. It's not going to look pretty week in and week out, and they're probably not going to win more games than they're going to lose playing this way. They're going to need to find a way to generate more big plays. But regardless, if your defense plays like this and you can run the football like this, then I'm okay with playing this way because that's how they're built to play right now.
Yeah, and I think I'm not expecting the Patriots to really win any games 31-28 this year. Maybe one mixed in there, but I'm just like this is to your point, kind of how they're going to have to win. Now, could they change some things? Like I don't know how much I love Brissett on some of those rollouts. I'm not saying not to do them at all, but it felt like there wasn't as much there. I think they need to improve the quick passing game a little because you saw the Patriots ran the ball tremendously today. I don't have the missed tackle numbers in front of me. I don't think they've come out, but Stevenson was forcing missed tackles left and right. Gibson even forced some as well. But we saw like Hooper had the big catch for the first down, the diving catch that looked good. Polk had a nice catch that almost got them a first down, but didn't. There was some good moments in there, but I think that quick passing game, that's something they're going to look to improve a little bit because you can't just rely only on the run game. So I'd like to see that improved a little bit. We saw the left tackle, whether it was Lowe or Okorafor, struggle quite a bit today in pass pro. And look, part of that was Trey Hendrickson's coming off the edge. But again, I think the better your quick passing game is, it helps mitigate that a little. So, like the offense, I think did a lot of good things today, but they only scored one touchdown, right? So we got to finish off some more drives. You want to see maybe that quick passing game improve. But I think, again, new OC, new quarterback, new head coach, still a lot of encouraging things from an offense that struggled quite a bit in training camp in the preseason.
You are watching the Patriots post-game show. I'm your host, John Serenitas. As always, I'm joined by my partner, WEEI's John Lyons. And as I said earlier, feel free to join the conversation. We know you have a bunch of other post-game show options out there, but if you want a forum where you can express your opinions and share your thoughts and talk Patriots football, well, this is it. Again, you are watching the Patriots Pulse post-game show, and we'd love to have you join the conversation. You mentioned Jacoby Brissett, just taking a quick glance at his numbers, John. 15 to 24, 121 yards. I've got two words for you: game manager.
Yeah, and he did take some big hits in there. Like he was only sacked once, but then he had that hit he took after a throw where he kind of got up gingerly. I think that was on a third down. The Patriots ended up punting. And even on a couple of his scrambles, he took some big hits. So that's just something over a 17-game season. And I know we've talked, who knows how long it is until Drake May starts, but just projecting it out, you want to try to limit those a little bit. That's why I go back to the quick passing game. But I thought, like the tight ends, Hunter Henry, I thought played well in this game. I thought Austin Hooper, in his limited contributions, played pretty well. So the next step is, and this is still a receiver core without Kendrick Bourne, who I think is probably their best player, right? And Demario Douglas had the one catch that I felt like Brissett overthrew him. Maybe if he puts that on him, he either gets a first down or is just short. Maybe you think about going for it there. So, but Brissett, again, with those criticisms in mind, he took care of the football. He made the right throw the vast majority of the time, picked up a couple key first downs on scrambles. Really, to me, John, only one truly bad throw Brissett made, and that was the one on the corner of the end zone that Hunter Henry battled for. It ended up falling incomplete before they scored after. So, I mean, really, one truly bad throw in a game. I'll take that.
Yeah, I will too. I mean, look, let's not kid ourselves here. This is why he was brought in. Okay, he wasn't brought in to go 28 of 40 for 320 yards, 3 touchdown passes, and a pick. He was brought in to manage the game, to give you that experience, to give you that mentorship with the young quarterbacks, to run the offense the way it should be run. Look, they played like Kevin Stefanski's Cleveland Browns today. This is how Cleveland has been competitive in recent years. This is why Van Pelt in that pool of offensive coordinator candidates this spring was appealing to Mayo and the Crafts because he was going to bring in that style of play. And a lot of this modern West Coast offense, this Shanahan-McVay West Coast offense that has taken over the league, a lot of the key elements of that offense, we saw that today, John. We saw the outside zone. We saw the pin and pull. We saw the Stevenson scoring on a wind slice back play. We saw them moving the pocket for him and bootlegging him. So a lot of the key elements of that offense that make it an effective offense, and in many ways make it a lot different rather than what we're seeing nowadays with the spread, were in play today. Now, look, I will say this. I think he is going to need to do more for them to win, And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I think a lot of that starts with the three-step passing game. They got to get the ball out quick, three-step, quick five. They've got to keep it simple for him. Everything's got to be 25 yards or less. If they get into the high red zone, then they can push the ball down the field. Or if they get into the red zone, then they can, try to score throwing fade balls or corners. But I think at the end of the day, I'm with you. I think that they do need to do more in that regard. Now, part of the reason you mentioned that they need to do more with the three-step passing game and more with a quick intermediate passing game is the offensive line. And you talked about the tackles. Both Chooks Okorafor and Vidarian Lowe played left tackle today, and both of them struggled. Trey Hendrickson, it seemed like to me he was beating them off the ball every single snap he played. I thought they did a good job on Wenu, did a good job on Sam Hubbard, but Hendrickson was getting consistent pressure. He was in Brissett's face a bunch. Look, at this stage of the game, John, you're not going to make a personnel change here. They're going to have to live with those guys there, but they are going to have to scheme it up because Brissett got hit a bunch today. And like you said, he was only sacked once, but he got up wincing a bunch of times. Guy's not going to make it much longer if he keeps getting hit like that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think this was a credit to Jacoby Brissett, kind of the veteran guy. You saw him step up multiple times and avoid Hendrickson off the edge. We saw a couple of those scrambles in there when he really needed to. But I was a little surprised they didn't do more tight end next to the left tackle or chipping with the running back. I think that's something against Seattle and especially the Jets and the 49ers in a few weeks. You're going to see a lot of 7-man protection, stuff like that, or at least extra help, I think, on the left tackle, because Trey Hendrickson's a great player, but I think some of these defenses coming up, especially week 3 and 4, you're going to have
They're better than Cincinnati's.
Yeah, you're going to have multiple great players in that front 4, in that front 7. So that's something I think schematically to kind of keep an eye on with Alex Van Pelt. And I think the receivers are going to continue to grow, right? Like this was Jalen Polk's first game. He had a nice catch. I think that was his only target as well. Douglas had a couple catches as well. They're going to continue to grow. Eventually they'll get Kendrick Bourne back. And I think like there's a ceiling here on how good this passing game can be. It's not going to be a top 10 passing game in the NFL, but if they can get it to be 19th, 20th, in that range, with the running game we saw today, then they'll be in good shape to win a decent amount of games similar to how they won today. I think it's just a matter of kind of building on some of the things they did well today. And a lot of it today, too. I mean, when you're averaging 4.8 yards a carry with Stevenson and he's forcing missed tackles left and right, you also don't have to throw as much as you otherwise would need to.
Speaking of the receivers and the tight ends, your leading receiver was Austin Hooper with 2 catches for 31 yards. Second was Tyquan Thornton, 2 catches, 27 yards. He ran a nice curl route there and got a first down at the start of the second half. KJ Osborne had 3 catches for 21. I mean, look, those numbers are terrible. Let's not mince words here. They're terrible. You need Kendrick Bourne back. But this, again, goes to the point we're making that this passing game is going to need to be better. This is a National Football League. You can win this way in high school. You might even be able to win this game this kind of way throughout the course of a regular season in college football, depending on the program and the level. But in the NFL, it's still a pass-first league. And while they're going to want to run the football, play good defense, shorten the game, stay competitive, have Brissett manage it, he's going to be put in a position in games where he's going to have to make plays as a passer, and these receivers are going to have to make plays. If for me, when I look at this game, I thought this group made some timely plays, but overall, I mean, again, they're as bad as we thought they were going to be.
Yeah, and I think it showed up in the red zone too, right? They were 1 of 4 on touchdowns in the red zone, kicked a few field goals. So look, they got points. They didn't turn them. That's good. But I think going forward, you want to see 2 out of 4, 3 out of 4 in the red zone instead of 1 out of 4.
And it starts with your skill group once you're in the red zone.
Yeah.
If your skill group's not that good, to your point, you're not going to finish drives. You're going to be settling for field goals.
Yeah, and I think this was the type of game, like they won today just pounding the ball and playing great defense, and they can win 4 or 5 games in a season doing that. It's just if you're going to win more than that, you're going to have to be able to open up the pass game a little bit. It's just the nature of the NFL, and that's why, too, like it is only week 1, so they're going to build on it, and they're going to continue to get better in the pass game. I just think we have to realistically expect there's a ceiling there. So can they get to that ceiling, continue running the ball and playing defense? Well, if they can do that, then they can stack some wins together as the year goes along.
By the way, unrelated, the Chicago White Sox, who are arguably the worst team in American professional sports history, beat the Red Sox this afternoon at Fenway 7-2. And I believe the Chicago starter in that game was Chris Flexen, who's, I don't know, something like 2-24 in games. His last 26 games he's pitched in for Chicago. I mean, those are
3 and
just like
24 now.
they're not even historically bad numbers. They're just, we may never see this again. But anyway, I digress. Were you surprised at how poorly Cincinnati played, though? I mean, this is a team that they're going to Kansas City next week. And universally speaking, many people on paper view them as the Chiefs' biggest competitor in the AFC. After today, I don't think so, man. I mean, I think in many ways, John, they didn't play well, but I'm not sure they're that good either.
So let me put it this way. I wasn't surprised that Cincinnati didn't play great, but I was surprised they looked this bad at times, right? Especially offensively. Like that is Joe Burrow. It is, and I know there was the contract issues and this and that. It's still Jamar Chase. And I think the CBS broadcast had a stat that under Zach Taylor coming into today, they're 1-9 in their first 2 weeks of the season, or 1-7, whatever it is, just in the first 2 weeks of the season, his tenure. And of course, they lose today. It's kind of bizarre that every year they find a way to start slow. I think you got to look at the head coach for that. I think there's a lot of blame there for starting slowly every year. You mentioned, though, this is a team that a few years ago went to the Super Bowl. They did make some investments, but then they let Joe Mixon go. They let Jesse Bates go. I don't know if T. Higgins and Chase are both going to be there next year. It's like they built this great team that went to the Super Bowl that, by the way, was capable of going to Kansas City and winning an AFC championship game. And they've kind of just let guys go, and they've, not adequately replaced some of them. So I still think the Bengals are a good team. I think they're a playoff team. I think they can, win a playoff game or so. But that what we saw today, if I'm a Bengals fan, I'm really disappointed because defensively, like, okay, you only gave up 16 points, but this was a Patriots offense that was the worst offense in the league last year, or near the bottom in just about every metric. And they were 6 of 15 on third downs. They ran for 170 yards on the ground when you knew they were going to struggle to throw it. And offensively, you had one good drive for 90 yards, scored a touchdown, and that was it. Multiple turnovers. So, yeah, I agree. Like, if I was a Bengals fan, I would be deeply disappointed. Not just the fact that they lost, but how poorly. And how about special teams? I mean, at what point is your punt returner going to let one bounce out of the end zone? I mean, like 3 punts inside the 20 for Bryce Behringer, and I give him credit, but weren't all 3 of those caught at the 10 and the guy was tackled, or the 8 and the guy was tackled?
Right. Yeah.
Like at what point?
Piss poor special teams play.
Yeah, like at what point are you going to figure some of that stuff out? So yeah, I mean, if I was a Bengals fan, I'd be really disappointed in how they looked, especially offensively and special teams wise today.
Joe Burrow, 21 of 29 for 164 yards. That's it. He got sacked 3 times. And the Patriots got pretty good pressure on him on a consistent basis, again, especially from their front defensive line edge guys. And they were able to get some pretty consistent pressure on him. And I think that proved to be the difference. Obviously, next weekend, of course, is going to be the home opener. Next Sunday, the Seattle Seahawks are in town. They, too, have a first-year head coach and former Baltimore Ravens defensive coordinator Mike McDonald. On paper, when you look at that game, Seattle, I think, is going to pose some different challenges, right? Because you got DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Tyler Lockett, assuming he's healthy, Kenneth Walker at running back. You got Geno Smith at quarterback, who's obviously nowhere near as good as Joe Burrow. But I do think his supporting cast might be better. And then defensively, they're not the Legion of Boom, but this is still a defense that has a lot of talent along that front 7, and they can get pressure. Can the Patriots get away with playing this way next week against Seattle? Or do you think they're going to need to open it up more, because that could potentially be a higher scoring game?
So I think they can play mostly this way, but they're going to have to throw the ball for at least a couple hundred yards against Seattle, right? Like I said, the way they played today, you can win 4 or 5 games in a year doing that. But if you're going to win more than that, especially like Seattle too, just to kind of compare to Cincinnati, I know it's a first-year head coach. I'd be surprised if they start as slow as Cincinnati did today. There's a lot of talent in that skill group. Like Jamar Chase is a terrific player and probably better than anyone Seattle has. But you mentioned Seattle has those three guys that you got to account for in that receiver group. They got a solid offensive line as well. So yeah, I think it's a team that's going to come into Foxborough. Now, again, traveling from the West Coast for a 1 o'clock game, that's an advantage for the Patriots, I think. But I think you're gonna I feel better about that game, John, than I did about 6 hours ago, right? So I think there's a path to victory there, but you're probably going to have to play defense like you did today, run the ball like you did today, and you're probably going to have to throw for at least a couple hundred yards or so in order to get that done.
We do have another comment. Ken joins the show and he texted in. He says, "I'm disappointed I didn't see much of Polk today." That is from Kenny, who checked in. Thanks for checking in, Kenny. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. What are you expecting to see? I guess, right?
Like, he had the one catch, and I felt like
catch. I mean,
and I felt like
I don't think this offense is going to be. It's not going to run through the receivers this year. It's just not.
No, and I felt like they went in with a concerted effort of we are going to run the ball because they had Polk in there quite a bit blocking too. And they lined to, and I know I didn't love this in the preseason and training camp, him lining up kind of as a wing player. They did a little bit of that today, not too much. I don't know if that's a great formula long term, but he competed. He blocked pretty well. And I think that was just kind of the style of game today. I think as the year goes on, you're going to see more and more of Polk. And again, hey, even that one catch, he was in coverage. He went out and snagged the ball, got, a yard after the catch. It's not anything spectacular, but that was the one target, and I thought he did a good job with it. So you're going to see, I think, more of him as the year goes on. I just don't think today's game, really for any receiver, but including him, it just wasn't the game for them.
No, it wasn't, because to your point, that wasn't the plan. I agree with you that I think we're going to see more of him, more of Javon Baker as the season goes on, but that wasn't the plan today. And look, again, even if you factor those two guys into the equation, I don't know how explosive this offense is going to be, especially with Brissett under center. I think you're more likely to make big plays in this offense if Drake May's your quarterback.
Sure.
But if Brissett's your quarterback, I think that they're going to trust him to take care of the football. They're going to trust him to manage the offense, and they're going to play it close to the vest, and they're going to play these types of games. And again, look, I know they're not fun for the fans, right? I know they're not the Kansas City Chiefs with Mahomes running around making these ridiculous plays and throwing it to Kelsey and Worthy and all the receivers they have. But I think this style still works in football at all three levels. And when you're perceived or on paper not a good football team, this is still a tried and true way to stay competitive. And look, it's a fine line for the Patriots. While you're, quote, rebuilding and you're trying to accumulate upper echelon draft capital, you also need to be competitive. This is the NFL. I mean, it's virtually impossible to tank in the NFL. So, I mean, I think it's one of those things where, to your point, this wasn't the week that those guys were going to be featured. But like we said, I do think moving forward, you will see these guys play a bigger role in the offense because, like we said, they're going to need them to. So I think that that's an important part of it as well. And, of course, this was Gerard Mayo's first win. Hard to believe, John. And when I wrote this, I had to pause for a sec. Today was the first regular season game that the Patriots were coached by someone other than Bill Belichick since 1999.
Yeah, it was actually technically, I think it was January 2nd of 2000. Technically was the last. I was at that game. Chad Eaton had a fumble recovery for a touchdown. Shout out to Chad Eaton. But yeah, I mean, it's, Bill Clinton was president. The iPod wasn't invented yet. There's a lot of things that have changed since then. And I think, again, this is kind of the overlapping theme of this whole game today. And we've talked about it all off season. How are things going to look under Mayo? How is he going to run minicamp? How is he going to run training camp? How is he going to run preseason games? How is he going to game plan? How is he going to run preseason? Like, all these things, I'm not saying positive or negative. They were just unanswered questions, right? That we had all along. And I think we saw, at the very least, this is a guy that will run a solid and competitive regular season game. Not only did they win, but I thought they played a really clean game, right? They didn't get, nicked up on a bunch of penalties. They didn't make a lot of stupid mistakes. Really, that one throw by Brissett in the corner, I didn't like. Other than that, I thought offensively, again, not a lot of glaring mistakes to me or things that they would want to definitely have back. Their special teams was good. Defensively, they were generally in the right position the entire game and they made key plays. So I think really walking away from this game, it's only one game, so we don't want to be hyperbolic, but you got to feel good. At least the baseline for Gerard Mayo as a head coach is solid.
I agree. And look, he had a tough summer. Let's
Yeah.
not mince words here.
Yeah.
He had a tough summer. The whole thing with the way that the quarterback situation was handled, the Judon situation, he didn't have the best summer.
Yeah.
He spoke a little too off the cuff at times. He exposed himself. But I think today he proved that in game he's got the right demeanor, the right temperament. He knows that he showed us that he can manage the game. Of course, it's a long season, so he's going to make decisions in certain situations where people aren't going to agree with it and they're going to be critical of it. But I thought in his first game, I thought he did a really good job. Now, I do think what helps is, and this isn't taken away from the job that Gerard Mayo did, but I do think what helps is you've got a large coaching staff now, and you have a lot of experience on that staff, especially in the offensive side of the ball. So you can really lean on those guys to help you navigate the game. I know that people are going to talk about Evan Rothstein and him being the situations guy, and that's all good. And I'm not taking anything away from him either. But I do think having a guy that's been a former head coach like McAdoo and having guys that on your staff that have the experience that they do, I think it's easier to manage a game when you have guys that are in your ear saying, you know what, let's not go for it here. We might want to play field position. We might want to kick it. Let's hold off on doing that until later in the game.
Yeah, and I think one thing that Mayo and I would also say the veteran players deserve a lot of credit for today. And you correct me if I'm wrong, John, but it felt like the Patriots won every single key situation that came up.
Yeah.
Right? Like I mentioned
I agree.
I mentioned the Duggar plays, right? The incomplete pass he helped break up in the end zone, then the forced fumble. That's a huge situation. End of the first half, the Patriots go down and get points. Huge situation. They did a great job milking the clock in the second half. And how about even the end of the game? Cincinnati punts the ball thinking, hey, not only do we have all our timeouts and the 2-minute warning coming up, but they didn't think the Patriots are going to be able to get 2 first downs. The Patriots won that situation, got multiple first downs when you and I and everyone knew they were going to run the ball, but they still were able to get multiple first downs. Again, credit to Stevenson as well in that situation. But it just felt like every key situation, offense, defense, and special teams, the Patriots won all the key situations. And that is something like if you want to think about, we talk about the style of play and all this, something that's sustainable. If you're going to win key situations like that in your first game as a head coach, now they're not going to win all of them all season long, but that's something that's sustainable. If you can be the better team in those situations, you're going to win some games like today that people thought you otherwise were not going to win.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think that's the key. Interestingly enough, Mayo, after the game, thanked the Crafts for the opportunity to coach the team. He said that they have stayed out of the way of all of the football stuff and turned the keys over to him and Elliot Wolf. Mayo said he was presented a game ball and he presented Wolf with one too. So there you go. So, I mean, I think that that's pretty telling that he would say that basically he needed, in my view, I see that as he needed to clarify it. And I'm not sure that was a question. I mean, we haven't seen the Crafts much since he was hired anyway. I mean, we know that they essentially mandated that they take a quarterback at 3. But outside of that, Jonathan Kraft has been non-existent up there since they introduced Drake May. And Robert Kraft was there here and there during camp. But it's interesting that he said that because I don't feel that the Crafts have been that present. And if they have been, it's probably behind the scenes. But don't you think it's a little interesting that he would go out of his way to point that out?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that stems from what happened in January and February, right? Like they move on from Bill, the guy that did everything. You bring Mayo in. Obviously, he's not going to do everything. And then there's all those reports. Remember, they wanted to, quote, take their team back. Like that was a report at the time. They wanted to empower some other people in the organization. You mentioned that taking the quarterback at 3 was probably, look, Wolf and Mayo probably wanted a QB at 3 anyway, but that was also probably a Kraft directive as well. So, I think there is some, I don't want to say there's fire there, but there's a little smoke that, hey, maybe they have a firmer hand in things than they did last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when you had Bill and you were good every year. So I can see why at some point he wanted to say it, but it is noticeable that he kind of brought that up after his very first win, right? It wasn't something that was asked of him in week 9 or in the postseason press conference. It was, week 1 win, and he brought it up. And I think it's also something that when he made the quarterback decision, remember the press conference? He was like, I made the decision. He kind of corrected himself there. So I think it's just also him finding his way a little bit with the media and trying to balance what's going on in the building and then communicating that outside as well.
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I found it surprising only because it's almost as if he was trying to diffuse a narrative that the Crafts are running things behind the scenes
Yeah.
and that he and Wolf are doing their bidding. Well, first of all, there isn't a coach, front office executive in the league that isn't doing the bidding of the owner. They work for the owner. So, I mean, again, it's not like I know people think that Jerry Jones is one of one, but any owner that gives a crap and wants to win is going to have a say in the direction of their football team. They're going to have a say in some of the day-to-day operational stuff. Now, is Kraft going to walk in there tomorrow morning and say, look, you know what? We need to figure out a way to block Leonard Williams on Sunday. Here's some pass pro ideas that I was thinking of. We should try to fit the back and B gap, and then we should double Williams and bounce it back. He's not going to do that, obviously. He doesn't know how to block Leonard Williams. But the point is, I feel like he almost had to say it as a way to thank the Crafts, but also I feel like he needs to continue to remind us that this is his football team. And quite frankly, John, at this point, I don't give a shit. I believe you. It's your football team. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and try to figure out whose team it is. At the end of the day, and you mentioned this earlier, the Crafts made it very clear when they parted ways with Belichick, when they mutually agreed to part ways. They wanted their football team back. They believed in him. They believed in Wolf. They gave them the keys to the car. I don't want to hear anything about this the rest of the season. I mean, unless Kraft comes out and starts making statements, I don't want to hear about it.
Yeah, and I think like this media stuff with Mayo, like I think, and you referenced this earlier, like he's brought some of it on himself, right? He's overshared at times or misspoken or some mixed messages. But I mean, if you come out and you play well and you win the key situations and you win games, it's not really that big a factor. Like that stuff, to me, that doesn't become a big factor until you lose 3 or 4 in a row, right? And then it's kind of like, well, he's saying this and he's saying that. If you're winning and you're playing well, which again they did today, then I don't think it's really that big a deal.
No, I agree. We got a couple minutes left here before we wrap up. So if you want to jump on and join the conversation, feel free. We would love to hear from you. Again, you are watching the Patriots Pulse postgame show. Patriots with an opening day 16-10 win over the Cincinnati Bengals. Who thought we would have been saying that? Oh, we've been talking about this since the schedule was released about how tough this first 8-week stretch was going to be for them. The fact that they can go on the road in Gerard Mayo's first game, play this kind of game, and come out of there with a W, I think says a lot about them. But as we talked about earlier, the schedule is still brutally tough. You got Seattle coming in next Sunday. Then they go to the Jets for Thursday Night Football. Then they have a few days off until they prepare for San Francisco and go out there the following Sunday. So it's not getting easier. And within that stretch, you also have Houston coming to town. You got the Miami Dolphins. It's only going to get harder from here. But I will say this, a win like this, if nothing else, and I know this is going to sound high schoolish or college-ish, but a win like this should really give this group a lot of confidence. They have to feel good about themselves that if they come to play, if nothing else, they at least give themselves a chance to compete.
Yeah, I think it's a good, solid foundation for this group, especially some of the younger guys. And I would even put some of the younger or newer coaches in that group too, because this is a team that had back-to-back losing seasons. They won 4 games last year. They moved on from their head coach. They had to draft at 3 overall and take a quarterback, traded their starting quarterback to be a backup in Jacksonville, right? So a lot of uncertainty there, a lot of new faces. There was some ups and downs in training camp. I mean, you and I were at that joint practice against Philly, right? Man, that didn't look too great. So there was some ups and downs in camp in the preseason. So to come out and the first time you prepare for an opponent, win on the road against a team that just a few years ago was in the Super Bowl, that's a perennial playoff team, I think it's a really nice foundational piece. Now, we'll see how much they can build on it. It's a brutal first half schedule for them, but at least they have that foundational piece there that they can look back to and say, hey, we were able to do it against Cincinnati. We can do it. And I think, again, that's a positive thing as they head into this really difficult stretch of games starting against Seattle next week.
Yeah, and you had some surprising scores today. I mean, Miami comes from behind and beat Jacksonville 20-17. The Bills, they were down 17-3 at one point. They come back to win 34-28. Steelers beat the Falcons 18-10. In many ways, Pittsburgh's going to play a lot like the Patriots will this year, run the football and lean on their defense. So you had some surprising scores, but I think for me, you know what? Look, I think it's a solid start to a season that we all agree no one thought that they were going to be better than 5-12, 6-11 this season. To pick up a win like this, I'm not saying all of a sudden now they're 10-7 and a playoff team. I still think they're profiling as a team that's going to finish somewhere in that 5-12 to 7-10 range. But if nothing else, this gives you a confidence boost. It gives Mayo a confidence boost. He now believes, not that he didn't before, I'm not implying that, but he now believes he can coach his football team and have success. I've been there. I've been a head coach, albeit at the high school level. When you win that first game, it's a huge burden off your back. So to get it in his first game, that's pretty impressive. Lauren checks back in here before we wrap up real quick. She says, I think Seattle next week will be a great game, but Seattle's offense was middle of the pack. Pats had a better running game last year statistically. Curious to see if Pats can sustain their energy and focus next week. Well, I don't think that'll be a problem. I think they'll do that. And thanks for checking in, Lauren. We appreciate it. I just think that I think Seattle at this stage of the game, while it's a winnable game, I do think that they could present some matchup problems within the game.
Yeah, I would agree. And to Lauren's point, though, I think it is something worth watching. It's Mayo's first win as a head coach, Van Pelt's first win as a full-time play caller since 2009, right? It's Covington's first win as DC. A lot of these young, can they refocus and play well next week, right? Because we see that how many times, John, young teams or teams that are rebuilding, they get a nice win and then they get a little too high off it and they don't play well the next week or the next 2 weeks. So I personally, I agree with you. I don't think it'll be an issue, but it's at least worth watching just in that you have all these new guys in these positions.
And the Seahawks are currently tied at the end of the first quarter here. There's about a minute left in the first quarter, but they're currently in a 3-3 tie with the Denver Broncos at home. All right, John, let's wrap this thing up here. Just some final thoughts.
Yeah, final thoughts. I thought this was a really impressive win to start off a year that not only do you have a new head coach, but I think a lot of people, myself included, felt was going to be part of a rebuild looking more towards 2025. And it still could end up that way, but this is a really nice foundation. They coached well, they played well, they won the key situations. They should be really happy with this result. And I'm really interested to see going into next week, can they build off it and maybe stack a couple good performances together?
Yeah, I agree. It's a small sample size, but I think that they did everything they wanted to do today. They ran the football. There's some good variance there by Alex Van Pelt. We didn't talk enough about him. I thought he did a terrific job calling this game. There was nice variety in the run game. They got 121 yards and a touchdown on him, Ramondre Stevenson. Jacoby Brissett did a great job managing the offense. He didn't put him in a position where he was turning the ball over, giving them a short field, and compromising the game plan. And again, we know how good this defense is. We've talked about it for the last few years. Good defense is still a pillar of this organization. I think it's going to keep them in a lot of games. And just like today, I think it could also help them steal a couple of games this year. Now, again, I'm with you. I still think that this team is projecting as a 5-12, 6-11, maybe 7-10 team. But today is a good start. And if nothing else, it's proof that if this team plays well and stays healthy, they'll be competitive this year. They may still end up losing 10 games, but they'll be competitive. And I think as a Patriots fan, that's all you can hope for at this point, is that they're competitive, that it's a watchable product on a week in and week out basis. And I think it's going to be. I think this staff's going to do a good job. And I think that this team's going to show meaningful progress. It's really more about next year. Now, of course, there's still the albatross hovering over the room here, which is, when's Drake May going to play? I think we could table that for now, right? Let's just focus on what this team is right now with Jacoby Brissett.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I thought week 5 or maybe week 9, and I think after today, the earliest is still going to be week 5. I haven't seen anything to change that.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, and I think part of it, unfortunately, might be that Brissett might not finish the season.
Some of those hits he took today. I mean, if that keeps up.
Yeah. I agree. And while I think on one who played well at right tackle, I thought Andrews played well inside. I thought Layden Robinson, the rookie from Texas A&M, did a
All
nice
right.
job at right guard. Michael Jordan didn't really watch him much, but left tackle is a glaring hole. And I do think, and I know NFL coaches and coordinators hate to think this way because it's almost a high school mentality, but you're gonna have to help your left tackle. They're gonna have to scheme up some protection stuff, like you said earlier, whether it be chip with the back, chip with the tight end, and release him late. Align a tight end in a wing there where he can get a piece of a guy. They're gonna have to help these guys because leaving them one-on-one and trying to put 4 and 5 out, that's great. But if you can't protect, what good is it putting 5 guys out? They're gonna have to figure out a way to help those guys out. And I'm sure they will. We're not telling them something they don't already know. I'm just speaking to the fact that NFL offensive coordinators tend to be stubborn when it comes to making those types of adjustments. So we'll see. John, great job as always, my friend. Greatly appreciate it. It's great to be back with you this fall. And of course, make sure you catch John on WEI whenever he is on. He is one of the best in the business. He does a great job over there. Great stuff as always. So please make sure that whenever John's on the airways, you give him a listen. And as always, as I say all the time, we know you have other options, but this is the show for the true football fan. We get into the X's and O's. We delve into it more than anybody else. So if you want to talk football and you want to get into it, this is the show for you. Please feel free to give us a watch and join the conversation. We want to hear from you. We don't want to just talk to each other for 35, 40 minutes every week. But, John, great job as always. We'll talk to you after the Seattle game next week.
Yeah, hopefully we have another good performance to talk about this time next week.
Yeah, and we will be joining you for the home games. We join you about an hour or so after the game because myself, Kevin Stone, we have to go down, get sound, everything else. And by the time we come back up and finish everything up, we're usually about an hour and 15 after the game. So try to stay patient with us. We will be on after the game next week. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Patriots Pulse post-game show. For John Lyons, I'm John Serenidis. Till next week, peace.